Hi, everybody. We were supposed to start a couple minutes ago, of course, but I don't know if you've heard that kind of loud alarm that's going on. We're trying to make it go away for the entire hour, and we just need like 1 more minute, so thank you for being patient. Hi again. Thank you for being patient. We're just really crossing our fingers that the alarm's not going to go off again, so let's all cross our fingers together, eh? Love it. Thank you. My name is Aidan Flax Clark, and I work here at the library putting on these programs, so I am thrilled to see all of you in the room tonight. And I also have the great privilege of interviewing Annie Proulx about her magnificent new book, Fen, Bog, and Swamp, which we're going to do in a few minutes. I really can't urge you enough to read it and to purchase it if you haven't done that already. It's for sale outside, and I believe all the copies are signed. Proceeds also go to benefit the New York Public Library, so that's pretty good. And you can, of course, check it out with your library card, your valid New York Public Library card, which everyone in this room, I presume, has, yes? You can always spot them when they don't have it. And I'm not going to say anything now, but I will find you later, and we'll talk. Annie Proulx is a library lion, and so many of us here are also, of course, gigantic admirers of her work. But the library is also proud to be home to her papers, which are in our Berg collection upstairs. And hopefully you saw the display that's outside with a few selections from those papers. They were selected by Carolyn Vega, who is the curator of the Berg collection, whose full title is the Henry W. and Albert A. Berg Collection of English and American Literature. If you didn't get a chance to see them beforehand, please go check them out. Afterward, they'll be there for hopefully a couple more minutes after the program. Carolyn is also going to give a short talk about what she selected and about the papers more generally in just a minute. We're going to get right to it. Right after I tell you quickly about some upcoming events, October 20th, Margaret Burnham with Saidiya Hartman is going to speak about her new book, By Hands Now Known, which unearths Jim Crow's forgotten history of racially motivated homicides and their enduring legacy in today's legal and political structures. October 5th, biographer Stacy Schiff is going to talk about her new book, The Revolutionary Samuel Adams, which was researched in part here at the library. She's going to speak with her #1 fan, who is Tim Gunn, it turns out. October 25th, thank you very much. Yes, it didn't happen. And speaking of Tim Gunn, on October 28th, we are finally bringing back our annual literary Halloween costume contest at the SNF library across the street. If you've never been, it is one of the most fun things we do here at the library. We invite people to come dressed in literary-inspired costumes, and those costumes are judged by Tim Gunn and New York Public Library librarians. You got fashion, you got books, you get a winner. That again is October 28th. All those events and more are on our website at nypl.org/live. Annie will be happy to answer some of your questions at the end of our conversation. You hopefully all saw your note cards that are sitting on your seats. Write down your question. Please write it down for me legibly, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. And if you're watching online, you can put a question in the comments on the YouTube, and we will field those too. And so we'll get your questions whether you're here or somewhere else. Lastly, Live from NYPL is made possible by the continuing generosity of Celeste Bartos, Manaz Ispahani Bartos, and Adam Bartos, and of course by all of you, our wonderful supporters near and far. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you very much for being here. And let's please welcome Carolyn Vega.
Hello. Hi. Thank you, Aidan. I'm so happy to be here tonight to welcome you all and to welcome Annie Proulx back to New York City and to the library for the first time in quite a while. The New York Public Library is the home of Annie Proux's papers, as Aidan mentioned. So the collection comprises material related to the composition and publication of short stories, novels, nonfiction articles, essays, and books, including several how-to gardening and cookbooks, among other writings. The archive also includes her sketchbooks and watercolors of landscapes and people, as well as Proux's extensive research files, which include maps, project files, and hundreds of photographs. The collection is open and available to research, and as you might have gotten the sense, it is a pretty illuminating collection that sheds light on her work and creative process. Annie Proulx has been awarded the Pulitzer Prize, the PEN/Faulkner Award, the National Book Award, among many other accolades. And one of the things that I really carry with me about her writing is the extraordinary way in which she situates the reader in the place of her writings, her deep sensitivity to physical settings, and to the ways in which her characters move through them. She does this in language and tone and presence on the page. To read her works is to feel that you can inhabit these worlds. The intimacy with which she portrays her characters and their surroundings really belie the distance between reader and character. That is, her works are, for me anyways, both deeply familiar and very foreign. Had I given much thought to the absolute isolation of the Newfoundland coast before reading the shipping news, or to the coursing endless wind atop a flowering meadow in the American West before reading Brokeback Mountain? No, but I can say now that I can so clearly imagine what it would be like to wind up and down those slopes in Wyoming. Here are a couple of sentences from Brokeback Mountain that really crystallize it for me. The mountain boiled with demonic energy, glazed with flickering, broken cloud light. The wind combed the grass and drew from the damaged cromults and slit rock a bestial drone. As they descended the slope, Ennis felt he was in a slow motion but headlong, irreversible fall. Here's that sense of place, with its dappled or broken cloud light. Here's that sense of connection with a character, for who among us has not found themselves sometime in a slow motion but headlong, irreversible fall? In Barkskins, the sweeping account of deforestation and colonialism and family ties, we are newly introduced to the familiar yet deeply foreign experience of being in an old-growth forest. To quote, "Here grew huge trees of a size not seen in the old country for hundreds of years, evergreens taller than cathedrals, cloud-piercing spruce and hemlock. The monstrous deciduous trees stood distant from each other, but overhead their leaf-choked branches merged into a false sky, dark and savage. Nature and light, the dark and savage sky, the flickering, broken cloud light." I found an echo of nature and light in Annie Proulx's sketchbooks recently, one of which you'll find on view in the case just outside. It's a pen and ink and watercolor depiction of a wide place in Roach River, which is in Maine. And it has a tiny note penned in the upper margin that it was a windy day with scud cloud and no fish, in all caps. I had to look up scud cloud. It's a fractious cloud at low height above the ground, detached and of irregular form. Annie Proulx also noted exactly the colors that she saw to capture the day in words as well as images on the facing page. She notes the white, gray, dead trees, the misty green in the center, with the water dark green in front, but white in the distance. Annie Proulx is very precise, meticulous. One of the reasons I think she can bring us so closely in is that deep knowledge of the natural world and the absolute command of language that she possesses. Scud cloud, no fish. Remember that this isn't a private sketchbook, and yet it perfectly captions the watercolor with just a very slight sense of foreboding. Annie Proulx is an observer of the natural world, and she's also a diligent reader. In her research files, you'll find pamphlets on hunting in Newfoundland from the 1960s, books on rodeo, with passages about cowboys' spiritual dislocation clearly noted in the margins, carefully indexed commonplace books with color-coded labels for topics such as landscape, charms and beliefs, and knitting. And you'll find scores of notes and drafts which serve to illuminate her deep knowledge, her meticulous attention to the craft of writing, and for her respect to the land. In research notes for The Were Trout, a short story published in Esquire in 1982, you'll find definitions for swamp and marsh and bog, as well as a list of questions for a geologist about the same. She wants to know, why are they called yellow bogs? How deep must the peat be? Is it a bog, a swamp, a marsh? And in the lower right corner on the same page, a note, swamp equals negative and claustrophobic. Here you see her precise knowledge and emotional attenuation in parallel, and at the very, very beginning of a project. So wetlands seem to have been on Annie Proulx's mind for quite a long time. When I read Fen, Bog, and Swamp, I did so slowly so that I could savor the experience. I did the same thing with Peter Matheson's The Snow Leopard. There are just some books that you want to capture the experience of having read for the first time. Back in early 2020, I was out on the West Coast. I was 8 months pregnant, and I knew that it was going to be my last trip for a while, although I couldn't have guessed for how long. While I was there, Annie took me on a walk on the coast near her home. A dusting of snow clung to some of the trees, and the wind was present. She showed me where part of the coastline had sort of sheared off, exposing clean layers of earth. And she told me about a project she was working on that would turn into this book. And I have to say, I've looked at dirt a little bit differently since that day, and I've thought about wetlands and the climate crisis with more clarity since reading this book. And I'm so looking forward to tonight's conversation, and I hope you'll please join me in welcoming Annie Proulx and Aidan Flax Clark. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me here.
You were supposed to be here maybe in May of 2020, I think. I remember, I think you were one of the first events we had to cancel at the beginning of COVID. So anyway, I'm glad you finally made it. And to talk about a new book, which we weren't going to do last time, so even better. But I would love, if you don't mind, to ask you a little bit about your papers to start with. Is that okay?
It is.
Okay. I just think it's fascinating to think about a writer's relationship to their personal papers, but usually when you encounter those papers, the writer is not alive. So you don't get a lot of chances to ask them how they collected them, why they collected them. And I guess, first off, I'm just curious, having seen those items outside, having heard Carolyn give her fantastic talk about this, how does it feel encountering your own collections, having seen them for what I assume is the first time in a while?
A bit strange, a bit itchy.
Itchy.
Yeah. I'm looking at them carefully to see if there's something there that's going to really embarrass me. I was quite surprised to see that in 1982 I was thinking about fens, bogs, and swamps. And apparently that's just stayed floating around in the back of my mind for 40 years. So ideas like that, you think they're gone, but they're not.
So you had forgotten that you were thinking about them all that time ago?
Oh yes, quite. When I started thinking about them again, it was, as Carolyn said, on the seacoast, on the shore of Fort Worden at Port Townsend, where I was living for a couple of years. And I just was so concerned about what was happening with the climate change that I couldn't write fiction. Fiction seemed frivolous and foolish, even in the face of this thing that was so massive, so huge. You don't get to see a major event like we're in right now. I mean, it's something you read about in the far distant past. So to have something like that in your lap drives everything else out of your mind, or at least out of my mind. So I became intensely interested in finding out more, understanding it, and fens, bogs, and swamps came into the top of my mind, so we were off to the races.
It's amazing. So you're known for living in, slightly more remote places than New York City, so I've always wondered why your papers ended up here. And I was reading the press release from when the acquisition was announced in 2009, and you had said, to me, there is an odd sense of balance that material dealing with some of the most rural landscapes in North America will reside in our major city. Which I thought was a nice way of looking at it, but I mean, how did they come here? Why are they here?
It had to do with a former director of French-Canadian persuasion, I think, who was interested in Franco-American writers. And although that doesn't quite fit me, I've got the kind of name that does. And he asked me one time, someone was speaking, I don't remember who it was now, but I was listening in the library. And afterwards, I was asked if I'd consider donating my papers. And so I thought about it, and it seemed like an honor and would relieve me of storage of an awful lot of material. These things are important.
I was reading this article the other day. It was from a few years ago about the reclusive Australian writer Gerald Murnane, and he was
Yes.
talking about how he collects his papers, and he's pretty obsessive. He apparently lives in a room that's surrounded by file cabinets, and it's ordered strictly chronologically, and he can point to a drawer and say, like, that's where my wife died, or that's where this book is. And, you know, on the other hand, I was thinking about someone like Gogol, who, like, burned half of Dead Souls and will never know what was in it. So on that scale, where are you? How do you collect, and how do you think about curating it all, or do you just kind of save everything?
I just fling things into a box, and when the box is full, I put a cover on it and get a new box. I don't catalog things or sort them out. If I have something that I think might be interesting or useful or any of the above that goes in the box, I can always throw it away later. So far, that hasn't happened too much, but that's all I do. It's near the desk, this box, and it keeps coming.
So you are an archivist nightmare, is possibly what you're saying.
Of course.
Do you ever imagine what people are going to do with all of this? Does that enter your brain at all?
No, it isn't. I don't want to think about it because someone will come who's going to write something about you, and God knows what they'll make of it all. You can't even figure yourself out. It's kind of frightening to wonder how somebody else is going to do it. You might turn out to be something entirely different than you think you are. But I don't waste any brooding on this. It is what it is.
So let me ask you a little bit about the book, if that's okay. And you mentioned some of the inspiration for this, but I heard you give a lecture that must have been an early version of this in like 2019. How long have you been writing this, and what caused you to choose Wetlands?
Oh, you must be thinking about the thing on the acerbic hand.
There's the American Academy of Sciences in Washington?
Yeah.
Yes, and the
It was.
acerbic hand did come
Right,
up.
they have a Washington chapter, so it met at University of Washington, and it just seemed to me that the acerbic hand was an interesting person who might fit into the flavor of the evening. So
We'll
that's
have to
what
come
that
back to
was
who the
all about.
acerbic hand is for people, because it's a wonderful story. But can you tell us why you chose wetlands as your subject?
No, I can't.
Okay, fair enough.
It was there, like Mount Everest.
Well,
They were there. I just wanted to know. I found, when out in Port Townsend, where I was surrounded by water, that I really didn't know that much about wetlands. And I wanted to know, though they'd been cropping up here and there, was there a difference between bogs and swamps? I didn't even think of fens at first, but I was quickly disabused. Fens came into the front of my mind quite early on. And I was thrilled because it was a body of water that I'd not really considered. So off we went.
For the love of God, can you help me know what the difference is between a fen bog and a swamp? I find it very hard to keep it straight.
What?
Can you let me know what the difference is between a fen, a bog, and a swamp?
You're not ready.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, it's said that way because it's a mnemonic device for the reader. This is a succession. They're all wetlands. They're all peat-producing wetlands, but some of them are fed by mineral waters, fens. Some of them are fed by ambrotrophic waters, rain, bogs, and swamps also are fed by mineral waters. So as we go from fen to bog to swamp, they become drier. It's really one continuous thing. They're not radically different. They're three phases of the same process of slowly drying out. There is a new book out, which you have seen and I haven't, about swamps and fens and bogs. You might mention that because I can't wait to read it. It sounds very good.
Yeah, it's actually in all of your programs as well in the recommended reading, but it's just called Swamplands. And his last name is Struzik, but I'm blanking on what his first name is. Edward.
Yeah, he's written a lot.
Yeah, he had a quote actually that I wanted to ask you about. He says, peatlands are difficult to assimilate because they are ambiguous, elusive, dangerous, sublime, and, as a Red River settler once said, deceitful.
Deceitful?
Yeah.
Yes.
Why? What makes them deceitful to you? Why do you think they are?
Well, Grimpen-Meyer comes to thought. There's deceitful wetlands for you. The Sherlock Holmes story, Hound of the Baskervilles, where Grimpen-Meyer plays quite an important part, and where the little bog ponies can go down suddenly while out on the side of a hill with a great cry and sink into the muck below. It's a bog that they've come onto, and a deceitful thing because it looks like lush meadow. There's a certain amount of moss grows on it, and from afar it looks like a wonderful place to run and romp and roll, and down you go. It's quite deceitful.
It's one of my favorite lines in the book. You say, bogs are very useful for suspense writers.
Indeed, right.
You quote a writer named Oliver Rackham, who says that the history of wetlands is the history of their destruction.
Yes.
Why?
If you think about it, there are very few screeds, books, poems, or anything celebrating wetlands. It's always about the draining and the fact that they're an impediment to travel, and that if they were drained, they could be marvelous acres of productive agricultural land. There's no time wasted in making that way. They're not celebrated for themselves. They're not praised for being what they are. Their existence is not particularly thrilling to people. It's thrilling to me, but to find a bog or a fen or a swamp and to try to understand its character, to see what's actually there, is really interesting. The easiest one is the swamp. If there are trees growing in it, it's a swamp, not to worry about the other two. But just remember, it's a continuum rather than three separate things. But that's why it's fen, bog, and swamp. I actually wanted to call it mire, which is the European cover word for all of these things, but my editor did not allow it. She didn't like mire for a title.
The rhythm of fen, bog, and swamp is better, in my opinion, but I love mire.
Well, fen, bog, and swamps is mnemonic, so that's why I like it, because it says in 3 words what it's all about.
It's funny, though, mentioning mire and giving the definitions. Later in the book, you kind of say that they're used all interchangeably, and sometimes it seems like most people, depending on where you are, who you are, these words get tossed around pretty loosely.
Yes. It's, I don't think it's ever going to change. I don't think the nomenclature is ever going to be hard and fast. Nobody's going to put up signposts. This is a bog around a wetland. The words are flung around. They're changed constantly. People use marsh to describe all of these wetlands, and it works if you use it. It doesn't work if you care about how it gets its existence and where it's going.
In terms of climate change, the most important thing that any of these lands do is sequester carbon. Is that correct?
Carbon and methane.
And methane.
Yes.
And what has been the effect of draining them in terms of releasing carbon? How do we?
It comes up. It goes into the atmosphere, and that's the problem. The soils of the Central Valley, once upon a time, were wetlands, peatlands. They're still, after 100 and some odd years, giving off CO2 and methane. You don't see it, but it's there, it's happening. So both of those gases are quite potent in increasing the warming abilities of the atmosphere. So we want to keep the lid on, and it's not that easy if you want to rip them up and make it into cornfields or wheat fields.
Yes, Struzik suggests that actually replenishing peatlands is potentially much more impactful in that way than planting a bunch of trees.
Yes, it is. It is. And there are experiments going on, quite timid experiments going on, with small pieces of polutification or rewatering. The British are leading the way in this. They have a number of really interesting projects. And the nice thing about those projects is they're set out to be long-term. They're not talking 10 or 15 years. They're talking 100-year projects that's going to spill over into generations. And that's the only way something like that can be done. So they have to raise consciousness of the contributors and the people involved in it. It's fascinating to see what is happening, and I don't know what's going to happen, but it's something we can follow, although the news on such things is far and few between. It's not newsworthy stuff, but it's really important.
Why don't you think it makes the news?
What a question. I dare say a lot of it is politics, a lot of it is business, a lot of it's money, a lot of it is confusion. It's not part of our culture or of Western cultures in general to work with the natural world. It's not something that we do. That stuff is there for us to use. So it's a little difficult to start thinking of it as something that we have to be involved with, that we can be part of it. It just isn't done, and they're trying that in England. I mean, they have to do it for these polutification projects to work out. And I suppose if you have a bog or a fen or a swamp in your backyard, that you can do the same thing. Instead of having it dredged and filled up with soil and planting things in it, you can keep the water on it. But not everybody has a bog or a swamp in their backyard, alas.
Only the lucky few.
Only the lucky few. And the few don't think they're lucky.
Yeah, you know, I was reading, maybe it was an interview with you about this book in Esquire, where you're saying the best thing a person can do is get rid of their lawn.
Oh, that, yeah, getting rid of the lawn.
So we all need bogs, I guess.
I think many people would rather stab themselves to death than get rid of their lawns. The lawn is deeply entrenched in American life. The thing is that you can keep your damn lawn, but make it a little bit smaller. Each year, just get rid of some of the grass and let the lawnmower rest a little more. And I think that's what's going to happen. Of course, if you live in the Southwest, you're going to be told by the municipal authorities to get your gravel rake out. You're not having a lawn. But in New England, New York, and the whole Northeast, the lawn is triumphant for now, and we'll see what happens.
Well, this is an entirely selfish question, but let's say that you're a person who recently got a lawn and has been thinking about how to get rid of it, but is completely inept when it comes to gardening. Other than getting rid of it in inches, which I like that suggestion, what should me or whoever, put there?
You have to go along to get a lawn. Yeah, it's, I don't know. I haven't seen very much on it that you should start out with just a little piece, getting rid of it. Make a small meadow, a little teeny-weeny one. I had bought a house in New Hampshire a year or so ago, and it had an immense front lawn that was, you guessed it, grass. And I'd spent some time at my house in Port Townsend getting rid of lawn and putting in berms of soil to make sort of this hilly, interesting topography that sheltered some plants. And then I heard that the people who bought it had flattened it out and made a dog run and a lawn. So the lawn thing is very important to a lot of people. And I think the psychological exploration of why lawns are so important is a book waiting to be written, not by me, but by someone. Why do we love lawns so much?
They're so annoying. I would be dying to read that book, so if you come across it, let me know.
Someone's going to do it, I'm sure. Maybe someone in this room.
Anyone?
I see eyes flashing at the idea.
Can we talk about bogs a little bit more?
Fog?
No, bogs.
Bogs, yes.
I already quoted my favorite line, about bogs being very useful to suspense writers, and it was very useful to you in the Weir Trout of Yellow Bog.
Yeah.
Well, let me start there. Actually, if you remember, what caused you to set that story in a bog? And I guess for people who haven't read it, very briefly, it's about a fishing trip in a bog that really doesn't go well.
I don't even remember the story. I know I wrote it, and I liked the word "Weir Trout," but I don't remember the details of the story at all, so I can't answer the question.
Fair enough. But I will take this moment to encourage you all to read it. It's in Heart Songs, I believe, and it's really good. I read it this morning for my first time. But maybe I can ask you instead about bog bodies, which you devote a fair amount of space to in the book.
Right.
And I suppose, just in case people aren't familiar, can you share what a bog body is?
A bog body is or was someone who was buried in a bog a long time ago, discounting the Jersey swamps. The archaeologists began taking note of the bodies in the bogs in Northwest Europe, particularly in Germany and Ireland and Scandinavia, and even England. There have been bodies found in fens, too. The reasons why people put bodies into bogs are complex and highly debated still. No one is sure. Mostly it's thought that the waters of the bog were liminal, that there was some kind of spiritual power involved in these waters. Many of the bodies, according to some experts, were sacrifices, human sacrifices. And it's true that some of the bodies were killed over and over and over. People were hanged, they were cut, they were decapitated. It just went on until there was nothing more you could do to end someone. So this kind of extraordinary multiple death thing had meaning to somebody long ago, but we don't know quite what it is. And the conjectures on why the bodies are in the bogs and who they are and what they meant is a fantastic world of imagination, fantasy, foolishness, and obvious guesstimates. But we're all interested in them. Finding a body in a bog is a thing, and it's important. Who were they? Why are they there? What did they do?
But, and they're remarkably well preserved.
Yes.
And you talk about how you feel a little abashed writing about these people, thinking about them, that you're sort of invading their space, and yet they have been dead for many centuries.
Exactly. It takes us into such a strange area about the remnants of these people being displayed in museums as curiosities. And there's something creepy about it. And if you lend yourself to the practice by looking at them, is it somehow an immoral thing. There's just something there that makes me feel very uneasy. So I don't know. There are more questions than answers. But it's a fascinating area, and lots of people have found it. So it's full of surprises. Almost everything that was first known about a particular bog body was later proved wrong. And that, in its own turn, was proved wrong again. So we guess. We try and base what happened 1,000, 2,000 years ago on our own lives and our own culture. We can't help it. We don't have the correct stance to understand what it was all about.
So Carolyn mentioned in her talk the importance of place to you, and I've read you talk about this, how it is, often the source of inspiration for your fiction, and so I suppose it's no surprise that both this book and Bird Cloud, your memoir, your kind of best-known pieces of nonfiction, are also inspired by place in their ways. And it just made me wonder, in terms of your writing process, how it's different for you, or I guess whether it's different, when you approach place as an inspiration for story and character versus, place as a gateway to, memory or something in the real world.
Place is extremely important to me. I think it's why I love the Irish writers so much. Place is huge in all of the Irish fiction that I've read. And I've read a lot of it and have had as friends some of the big Irish writers. It's the finest writing out there for me. I don't know, I'm wandering far afield. Place, it is the beginning for me of a story or an idea or anything. What I like is the continuum, and a Thoreauvian thought is the repetitive observation of place. In the past, this was something that was innate in humankind. You went through the same territory again and again every day without specifically looking. You saw the changes in plants, in light, in the soils, in everything. And that repetitive observation of the natural world is something that's so rare now. It's incredibly rare. Not many people get to do it, but you can. If you take the same walk in Central Park every day, you're involved in a repetitive observation. And from that, you can draw up ideas that will hold water, because what you've seen over a long period of time, or even a year or a month or a week, is worth something. It's a truth that you have found. Others may not see it, but you do. And the proof is your repetitive observation. You were there. That's how it was. But that's what Thoreau did. It's also what Aldo Leopold did.
Speaking of Irish writers, I was delighted to see you quoting a couple lines from At Swim Two Birds in there. It's just a remarkably wonderful book that very few people talk about.
Yes, right.
I like, which is the book with the scientist who thinks that if you ride a bicycle long enough, you'll eventually kind of become the bicycle?
Oh, yes, my youngest son's favorite book, and I can't remember what it's called, that if you ride the bicycle, you turn into the bicycle eventually. And it's a marvelous story.
Oh, The Third Policeman, right?
Yes.
Flann O'Brien.
Yeah.
You mentioned time, and there's a line in this book. You say, "Time shows us the earth as a fluid patchwork, constantly in flux, so slow it is invisible," which is kind of what you were getting at a moment ago.
Yeah.
And I came across this line in Bird Cloud that you said a similar thing. You wrote about a fault in a cliff near your home. You said it was a reminder that the earth is in slow, constant flux.
Yeah.
And you mentioned our failure to appreciate that kind of relentless sluggishness. Do you attribute that as part of our inability to deal with climate change, sort of as a species?
I think that has to be true. For me, that sense of time has been with me since I was a child, and maybe it is for everybody in this room, I don't know. But the feeling that we are part of an extremely long line of events in the natural world is strong. I just think and feel that way. I don't give it much thought. It's just how it is, it seems to me. I accept that everything is changing slowly. Fen, bog, and swamp.
So related to that is you talk about the kind of remarkable complexity of these wetlands, and that, you know, on the surface we see some stinky water and some sedge grass or some trees, but underneath that is this kind of miraculous web of life. And I'm curious, when you look at a fen, a bog, or a swamp, how do you see that web of life?
Much like a spider web in a doorway.
What does that mean?
You go through the door, right? You break the web. So if the web of life is being broken constantly, that image holds up. I say that because I walked through a web a couple of days ago. It's in the door of the greenhouse. And but, yeah, it's the web of life was such a lovely idea. It seemed so rich and permanent and enormous, and it's so tattered now, that web. Ability.
They're grading you.
Meet me at 10.
They approve. You're getting good grades. So I'm going to get to some questions from the audience in a second. But you weren't able to travel for this book, but would you have, under less COVID-y circumstances, would you have tried to visit more of these places?
Probably. Yeah, I'm too old. It's not COVID, it's me. And at 87, you want to slow down a bit. Travel is difficult. Travel is not easy and really not very much fun, I don't think. If it ever was. I guess maybe it was when you could spring onto a ship and go off on the bounding main and chart porpoises and strange exotic lands. But now, when you think of the airport and your time in an airport, it's crushingly depressing. It's not something that I want to do. And there are no more ships to take you into the bounding main. Cruise ships instead. Where I lived in Port Townsend, I could look out my kitchen window and see these behemoths coming down the Puget Sound and heading for Alaska and other delightful places.
I hear they fixed all the airports, so I think you're fine there. They're all better. All of the airports, they fixed them. They're all better.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
We made it so long. So this book, in a way, one of the things that delighted me about it is that it felt like, as much as anything else, it's about you as a reader, because you're pulling together so many sort of unexpected connections between poetry and scientific literature and nature writing, and, you know, the book is quite discursive in many parts, and it made me wonder whether reading inspired the writing of this book, or you had to go find all of this reading.
No, I knew a lot of it. I am a reader. I learned to read when I was 4 years old, and I never stopped. So to me, reading is enormously important. It's part of my life. If I am trapped somewhere without a book, I feel very put upon. And I rarely go anywhere without some kind of reading material with me. It's painful to be without something to read, even if it's a cereal box or whatever. So yeah, I had the book habit early on.
I have 2 books here. If you want one, you can have one. So maybe I should turn to some of the audience questions, if that's all right.
Okay.
Do you think that the ban on burning peat for fuel in Ireland will help preserve the bogs there?
Do I think that the banning of the, yeah, probably. And it was very, 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 very hard for the Irish to decide that they were going to save the world by not burning peat, especially when it was such a fantastically rich part of Irish life for so many centuries. But the banner of Save the Climate is flying here and there, and I think it has been embraced, if not enthusiastically, somewhat grudgingly. So it's happening. People are aware. Whether it will save the peatlands of Ireland, we'll see. But it's just amazing how much peat gets dug up and sold to gardeners. It takes thousands of years to build the peat, and peat mining can just whip it up in a week or so, just take out 10,000 years of buildup. There's a chap in Vermont whom I knew years ago when I lived there, who goes up to New Brunswick and pays people to dig up the peat in their bogs, which he parcels up and sells for high prices. And he says that he's giving work to people in a poor rural area who would otherwise not have much of an income. There was recently, though, strange afflictions for many people in New Brunswick. And I wonder if it had to do with digging up the bogs, but I haven't looked into it or pursued it at all. I just think that he's a bit of a weasel. So, what can I say?
I'm going to slightly paraphrase this one, but given how much opposition or oftentimes disinterest there is in issues around climate change, why do you think that nonfiction is a more effective way to change people's minds than fiction?
I don't know. I don't think I can answer that question. I have been involved with climate change in fiction, but this book started out as something for me. I learned about something by writing about it, and I wanted to know. It wasn't intended for publication, but after a while I had something that looked like it was an essay, and I sent it to Liz Darnsoff, my editor, and she in turn sent it to my editor, who saw something in it. But I wanted to, when I was writing it, I wanted to not make it personal, but to keep it more distant and third person off in the corner kind of thing. At my editor's insistence, I added in a lot of personal things, which I ordinarily would not have done with this. So I felt rather naked about putting those bits in. And I've been trembling because there's a part that describes how I stole the raft of a couple of kids from school long ago. And I escaped and left their raft on the shore. But I've always dreaded that with this book coming out, some old geezer's going to come up to me and say, "That was my raft you took." and I'll pay bitterly. I'll probably be sued or something.
I love that part, actually. It was, and we have someone here for you.
Oh, no.
This question, I'm having a hard time deciphering, so I'm going to ask for help in the room from whoever wrote it. It says, was bog water super acidic or a preserver of human bodies?
Both.
Okay, never mind.
But that's not the element that preserves the bodies. It's the sphagnan, not sphagnum, but sphagnan, S-P-H-A-G-N-A-N. They thought for a long time it was the acidity, but that's more complex. Bog waters can be as acidic as vinegar if you scoop some up at the edge of the bog and bring it home and put it in your acid measurement kit, and you'll find out that it's pretty acid.
Speaking of sphagnum, you seem to have quite the reverence for sphagnum moss.
Ah, it's great stuff.
What is it?
It's a plant with sort of a twisty stem that has several different kinds of leaves, some leaves that hang down and draw water up, and others that float out, and it has a fat, plump head, the capitulum. It's a grand plant, and the senescent parts down below don't die. They just form peat after years and years and years. So there's a slow, slow, slow change that goes on as the weight of the water and the weight of the plants presses everything more tightly and closely together. The sphagnum is, I don't know, I'd have to look it up in the book, frankly, exactly what it is chemically. The new book that you mentioned, Mr.
Struzik.
Struvik, I bet there's something in there about sphagnum.
I bet there is. I only got to the introduction and the conclusion, which was enough to pretend that I had read it. But it's probably lurking somewhere in those chapters in between.
That's what some reviewers do.
Yeah.
Neat trick.
Well, you know, when you get paid so little and you have so little time. So we're probably coming to the end. I don't have a clock on me. Okay, great. But I have a few more questions for you, if that's all right. So you mentioned that you had put some personal things in here, and you kind of sneakily weave in a little anecdote that you moved all the way across the country back to New England to live in that part of the country for the first time in many years.
Yes.
What is it like to have returned to this part of the country after so long?
It's a learning experience. It's very, very different than it was when I left 25, 26, 28 years ago. When I left, there were no ticks. When I left, ash trees were healthy. When I left, you could go for a walk in the woods without being molested by various insects. When I left, there were more swallow-tailed butterflies. It's changed. It's quite different. There were no jumping worms. For those of you who have not made the acquaintance of Asian jumping worms, you have a treat in store. They are a pernicious pest, and they are coming to a woodland near you. So, yeah, it's a different place altogether. The one thing that's not different, the one thing that still shatters me is the light. The light that you find in heavily wooded country compared with the light of the West with its big sky and its colors which go fast. It's so different to be back in the Maxfield Parish atmosphere again. And it's very affecting. That has not changed. That is the same, and they are still, for me, the most beautiful skies. So I can always lean on that for, why did you move back to New England? For the light.
You, in Barkskins, your last book, which is also in its way about the depletion of natural resources, it ends with some amount of hope. There's a fair amount of despair in this book, although there's also plenty of hope where people are trying to restore peatlands and small pieces. But it made me wonder what your relationship to hope is in terms of climate change these days, and if it's changed since you wrote Barkskins.
It's fleeting. It doesn't really matter because hope isn't necessarily an ingredient in earthly change. It's not a necessary thing in the mix. What happens is what happens. What we hope will happen, which is mostly to go backward, is not going to happen. I mean, you can keep some part of how things were for a while, but the change is going to win, and we are not going to have much to say about it at this point. We already did what we did. So I'm braced for the rest of my life, which isn't exactly long at this point, to take in the change and see which way it's going, to observe it, and to thank my stars that I'm seeing one of the most magnificent times in the Earth's development. This is the Earth's history that's happening. We are the most populous living creature on it, except for some microbes and insects. But the Earth will do certain things, and we're here, and we can watch it, but we can't probably stop it at this point. I think we have passed the line of making the change and keeping the past that we all remember so fondly. And so when people say to me about fighting climate change, I really don't agree with that. I think we have to adapt to it to make the best lives we can with what we've got now. And if it means giving up lawns, I'm happy to do that, just every little bit, and to take great pleasure in what is left to us and keep up that constant observation. So.
Well, Annie, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for this book and all of your books. And please, everyone who hasn't, Fen, Bog, and Swamp, it's outside. And let's give it up for Annie Proulx.
Thank you all for the good questions.